Every time a billionaire posts a $2 million hypercar with doors that fold up like a transformer, I think the exact same thing. This thing was built by a bald Swede with no engineering degree, who beat Bugatti. Now think about who Bugatti is. Bugatti is owned by Volkswagen, one of the largest car companies on planet Earth, with effectively infinite money, thousands of engineers, and 100 years of legend behind the name. And in 2017, on a closed highway in Nevada, a car from a tiny company most people can't even spell hit 277 miles per hour and ripped the production car speed record right out of Bugatti's hands. Here's the part nobody tells you. This man started with no inheritance, no racing dynasty, no badge your grandfather respected. He funded his dream by importing frozen chicken and misprinted plastic bags. So how does a guy from a garage build the most expensive, most insane machines on the road and convince the richest people alive to pay him almost $4 million for one? It's the exact same trick a watchmaker named Richard Mille pulled on the watch world. And once you see it, you'll never look at a hypercar the same way again. To understand why Koenigsegg is so insane, you first have to understand the rules he broke. The exotic car world was never really a car business. It's a luxury business. The same psychology as a Rolex Daytona, a Birkin bag, or a Patek Philippe. And the #1 rule of luxury used to be simple. You cannot buy your way in. You have to inherit your way in. Ferrari had Enzo and decades of Formula One victories. Lamborghini had the legend of a tractor maker who got insulted by Enzo and built a rival empire out of spite. Bugatti had a century-old name and the bottomless wallet of Volkswagen behind it. Even a Rolex isn't really selling you a watch. It's selling you 100 years of everybody already knows what this means. That was the entire game. Story first, engineering second. The old money buyer wanted a car his father would have approved of, a name that whispered tradition, pedigree, belonging. But somewhere along the way, a new kind of buyer showed up. Tech founders, crypto money, self-made billionaires under 40. And they did not want their grandfather's Ferrari. They didn't care about a dusty trophy from the 1960s. They wanted something that looked like it fell out of the future. Something so extreme that the heritage brands literally could not build it. And here was the gap in the system. The big brands were trapped by their own history. They had shareholders, lawyers, and a legacy to protect. They moved slowly. They played it safe, which left the door wide open for someone with nothing to lose and nothing to inherit. Meet Christian von Koenigsegg. When he was around 5 years old, he watched a Norwegian stop-motion movie called The Pinchcliffe Grand Prix, a story about a humble bicycle mechanic who builds his own race car in a workshop and beats every factory team to the finish line. That children's film became his entire life's mission, but he had no money and no automotive background. So at 19, he started an import-export business, trading, and I am not making this up, frozen chicken and misprinted plastic bags into the former Soviet bloc. He made real money. And then, in 1994, at just 22 years old, he did the single most irrational thing a young millionaire could do. He burned all of it trying to build a supercar from scratch. No engineering degree, no factory, no suppliers, no heritage, just a sketch and a stubborn dream. By 1996, he had a running prototype, hand-built piece by a tiny team. And here's where the genius kicks in. The move that makes him the Richard Mille of hypercars. Richard Mille had no watchmaking heritage either. So, instead of pretending to have a 100-year history he didn't have, he did the opposite. He made his watches look so radical, so mechanically insane, so obviously from the future, that history became irrelevant. You weren't buying old money. You were buying tomorrow. Koenigsegg ran the exact same playbook on cars. He couldn't out-Ferrari, so he decided to out-engineer all of them, and to make that engineering visible, theatrical, almost alien. He didn't buy off-the-shelf parts like a startup should. He built his own engines, his own transmissions, even his own carbon fiber wheels, in-house, in Sweden, on a former fighter jet airbase. He wasn't selling you a car with a famous badge. He was selling you proof that one obsessive Swede in a garage could humiliate the most powerful car companies in the world. That was the product. Now, here's the aha moment. Because the price, $2.8 to $4 million a car, is not a mistake. It's not even really about performance. The price is the flex. The complexity is the product. Think about what Richard Mille actually sells. Not timekeeping. Your phone tells better time. He sells visible mechanical insanity strapped to your wrist. Skeletonized movements, exotic materials, a price tag that screams, "I can afford to be irrational." The watch is a credential. Koenigsegg sells the automotive version of that exact feeling. Look at what he engineers. Not because he has to, but because it's spectacular. He built Freevalve, an engine with no camshaft at all, where every valve is controlled individually, something the giants with infinite budgets never put into production. He built Koenigsegg Direct Drive in the Agera, a hypercar with effectively no gearbox, replacing the transmission everyone says is mandatory. He built doors, the synchrohelix doors, that rotate and fold up and out in a single robotic motion, so the car looks less like a vehicle and more like a transformer mid-transformation. None of this is necessary. A Honda gets you to work just fine. But that's the whole point. Just like a $500,000 Richard Mille is absurd, a Koenigsegg is engineered to look impossible, so that owning one says something no Ferrari can say. I didn't buy the legend everyone already has. I bought the thing from the future that almost nobody on Earth can get. And here's the scarcity that locks it in. Koenigsegg makes around 50 to 60 cars a year. Total. For comparison, Ferrari makes that many before lunch. With roughly 850 employees building a few dozen machines, every single car is essentially a one-off science project. And the buyer is paying for the privilege of owning a piece of one man's obsession. The depreciation barely matters here, because you're not buying transportation. You're buying a credential that says you're not just rich, you're rich enough to be irrational. But it almost never happened. Twice, this whole dream nearly died. First, the money. In the early years, Christian burned through every cent he'd made on frozen chicken, then emptied the savings his own father loaned him. His dad ended up working nearly full-time, unpaid, just to keep the doors open. They were, by his own admission, broke. Then, in February 2003, just 2 weeks before the CC8S was supposed to debut at the Geneva Motor Show, the moment that would finally prove him right, the factory caught fire. It was a Saturday. Staff who happened to be on site literally smashed windows and shoved half-built cars out of the building by hand to save them from the flames. The cars and tooling survived, but Christian's childhood sketches, the early company records, almost the entire archive of how this dream began, burned to ash. Most people would have quit right there. Instead, he relocated to an abandoned Swedish Air Force fighter jet base in Ängelholm, which gave him a private runway to test on. The disaster became his test track. And then came the payoff. November 4th, 2017. A customer owned Agera RS on a closed stretch of Nevada highway averaged 277.9 miles per hour, shattering the record held by the Bugatti Veyron Super Sport since 2010. The same Koenigsegg also ripped through a 0 to 250 and back to 0 run in under 34 seconds, while Bugatti's Chiron needed roughly 8 seconds more. A man who funded his company selling frozen chicken had just out-engineered a brand backed by one of the biggest industrial empires on Earth. The Pinchcliffe Grand Prix wasn't a children's movie anymore. It was a business plan that worked. So let's be honest about what's really happening here. A Koenigsegg is, by almost every engineering measure, one of the most advanced machines a human being has ever built. That part is completely real. But the $4 million price tag isn't paying for speed. You can buy fast for a tiny fraction of that. What you're actually buying is the same thing a Richard Mille buyer is buying: a credential. Proof that you reached the one corner of the market that money alone can't fully crack, because there are only 50 of them a year, and a bald Swede in Sweden personally decides whether the future gets built at all. Ferrari sells you 100 years of someone else's legend. Koenigsegg sells you the fantasy that one obsessed outsider with no heritage and no permission can still beat the giants. And in a world drowning in old money, maybe that fantasy is the rarest thing of all. So here's my real question for you. Is Christian von Koenigsegg the purest genius in the entire car industry? A true artist who builds the impossible just because he can? Or is alien innovation just the most brilliant marketing trick ever played on the ultra-rich? The same flex as a $500,000 watch, only with wheels? Drop your verdict in the comments. I read all of them, and the best debates always happen down there. If this gave you a new way to see the hypercar world, subscribe to Exotic Car Talk, because next time we're exposing how Ferrari quietly decides which billionaires are even allowed to buy a car, and which ones get told no.